Welcome to the Lost Practical channel. We're here to dig into the past, to find the lost knowledge and customs that once defined our world but have disappeared beneath the layers of history. Today, we're going to France. We imagine it as a land of romance, baguettes, and elegance. But in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower and the elegant boulevards of Paris lurk the ghosts of strange and sometimes creepy traditions. These were rituals that regulated the lives of people, from peasants to kings, but which did not survive the lightning of revolution, hygienic cleaning, and the march of the industrial age. We're not just talking about old habits. We're going to delve into the lost festive and social traditions of France. Traditions that, if they existed today, would seem completely impractical, wild, or even illegal. Get ready, because we begin our countdown. The 5 missing pillars of French public life. If you lived in France before 1789, your life, and therefore your social traditions, were completely inseparable from the feudal system known as the Ancien Régime, Old Order. The most notable and humiliating of the lost traditions was the ceremony of feudal obligations. It wasn't just taxes. It was an annual public ritual to confirm your status as a serf or dependent tenant. Peasants were not only required to pay a dues, a portion of the harvest, such as 10% of grain or wine, but also to perform the corvée, unpaid forced labor for their lord. Imagine a day when a peasant had to come to the castle, not just with a sack of grain, but with a sense of absolute subordination. In some regions, there was a custom according to which a peasant had to publicly acknowledge his dependence on his lord by swearing allegiance to him in front of the community. This tradition was a cornerstone of the economy, providing the feudal lord with labor and resources. But its disappearance after the August decrees of 1789, which abolished feudal rights, was more than an economic change. It was the end of a civic tradition based on public obedience, and the birth of a tradition of civil equality. This ritual of obedience disappeared forever, replaced by the act of voting and paying taxes to the state. Before the Reformation, and especially before the strict control of the church and the state, one of the most bizarre and chaotic holiday traditions was the Fête des Fous, Festival of Fools. This tradition, which flourished in the late Middle Ages, 12th to 16th centuries, was celebrated around Christmas and New Year, especially among the lower clergy. It was a ritual of an inverted world. During this festival, junior clerics or even ordinary citizens would elect a Bishop of Fools or King of Fools. They would dress in masks, mock the authorities, sing obscene songs, and hold mock masses. In some cities, such as Rouen, participants might even enter church backwards, burn old shoes on the altar, or use the smoke from old socks instead of incense. It was a sanctioned but unbridled letting off steam, briefly disrupting the entire social order. The disappearance of this holiday was gradual. It was strongly condemned by theologians for blasphemy and by secular authorities for its unpredictable, anarchic energy. By the 17th century, most bishops had banned the tradition, replacing it with more controlled and pious carnival events. It disappeared because it had become too dangerous for the new, more orderly society. The French Revolution didn't just change the government. It tried to change the very fabric of everyday life, creating entirely new but short-lived social traditions. 2 of them disappeared, leaving only astonishment behind. The first the Republican Address Citoyen. In 1792, the use of titles like Monsieur or Madame was banned. Everyone, regardless of social status, had to address another as citizen or citizen. This was the practical embodiment of equality. Addressing was mandatory and part of everyday social interaction. It lasted only until the end of the Terror, when the formalities of the old world began to slowly but surely return. The second, and the most strangely lost tradition, is the French Republican calendar. It was introduced to erase any religious influence from the temporal dimension. The week became 10 days long, décade. The months were given poetic, agronomic names: Thermidor, Pluviose, Brumaire. This tradition was completely impractical. Instead of 1 day off per week, Sunday, workers received 1 day off for 10 days, décadi. This was economically beneficial for the state but physically exhausting for the people. The tradition was officially abolished by Napoleon in 1806, and France returned to the regular Gregorian calendar. The 19th century did not abolish traditions. It formalized them to an incredible rigor, many of which were later discarded by modernization. One such disappearing social ritual, especially in elite circles, concerned visits and greetings. Every action, from the number of kisses, la bise, to the exchange of business cards, was subject to unbreakable rules. For example, the tradition of the obligatory visit required that a person who had recently arrived in town or recovered from an illness be the first to pay a visit, rather than waiting for an invitation. Failure to do so was considered public disrespect. The most bizarre custom was the rigor of la bise, a kiss on the cheek. In different regions of France, there was a strictly established number of kisses. In Paris, 2. In Brittany, 4. In some provinces, only 3. Breaking the prescribed number, or worse, attempting a kiss in an inappropriate area, could be seen as a public insult or ignorance. This strict etiquette disappeared not because of the law, but because of 2 world wars and economic necessity. In the fast pace of modern life, there was no time for such a formalized game. The tradition of visits was replaced by phone calls, and then by email. Although la bise survived, its rules were greatly simplified. The 19th century did not abolish traditions. It formalized them to an incredible rigor, many of which were later discarded by modernization. One such disappearing social ritual, especially in elite circles, concerned visits and greetings. Every action, from the number of kisses, la bise, to the exchange of business cards, was subject to unbreakable rules. For example, the tradition of the obligatory visit required that a person who had recently arrived in town or recovered from an illness be the first to pay a visit, rather than waiting for an invitation. Failure to do so was considered public disrespect. The most bizarre custom was the rigor of la bise, a kiss on the cheek. In different regions of France, there was a strictly established number of kisses. In Paris, 2. In Brittany, 4. In some provinces, only 3. Breaking the prescribed number, or worse, attempting a kiss in an inappropriate area, could be seen as a public insult or ignorance. This strict etiquette disappeared not because of the law, but because of 2 world wars and econ. We see that public and festive traditions in France were not simply pleasant customs. They were practical means of maintaining power, hierarchy, or social order. Royal rituals asserted the king's authority. Feudal ceremonies maintained social dependence. the Feast of Fools provided a controlled outlet for social tension. As these structures collapsed, rituals became impractical. They were either banned, like feudalism and the 10-day week, condemned, like the Feast of Fools, or simply displaced by the speed and economy of the modern world, like strict etiquette. The disappearance of these traditions reminds us that culture is not a stable monument, but a river that is constantly changing its course, and that what seems strange or impractical to us now was once a vital element of social engineering, omic necessity. In the fast pace of modern life, there was no time for such a formalized game. The tradition of visits was replaced by phone calls and then by email. Although Bise survived, its rules were greatly simplified. And what impractical but beloved traditions have disappeared in your country? Tell us about it in the comments. If you are interested in diving into lost worlds, subscribe to the Lost Practical channel and press the bell so as not to miss the next historical investigations. See you soon.